Um, Thanks everyone for joining in for this fireside chat today. My name's Eric. I'm part of this Dashbot marketing team. I've been here for a little over 2 years, and I love everything about chatbots, educating on the conversation AI space, and that's really the reason for today's chat. Brought in two of the top experts in this space, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy what we have to share. I'll do a quick intro just for everyone to know who we are. So Henry is joining us. Henry who? He's also part of Dashbot. He's got over 7 years experience in this space. Probably seen a little bit of everything from the technology changing over the years, from things like purely intent-based chatbots to all the new LLM, Gen AI advancements. And I know he's also worked with some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies, seen how they build out their chatbot programs. So really excited to have Henry here today.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Eric.
Yep. And last but not least, Martin Redstone. Thanks for joining us. Martin hails from the UK, as you guys heard earlier. And yeah, he runs several companies, including Bot Jobs, which many of you have probably heard of. If not, check it out. It's an amazing resource for all the companies and job listings in the chatbot CAI space. And Martin really brings a lot of expertise from that he deeply understands the people side of these organizations, what's needed to build out bot programs, how to hire for AI talent, and this ever-changing skill set that companies are looking for. So thanks again, Martin, for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for joining in. Looks like we've got a few more people rolling in, but we're going to kick it off. So I want to intro one concept first before we dive into the meat of this. And that's the chatbot intelligence maturity curve. This is something that we've developed over years, just working with various companies. And as we explore this maturity curve, it's a framework that was developed as a strategic blueprint for organizations that are really aiming to harness the full power of chatbot technologies. The framework is meant to help you understand in 3 phases where you are on this curve, determined by the maturity of your bot program. So we'll dive more into that soon. But also, I want to hand it over to Martin to share about another important framework. This one goes hand in hand with the maturity curve, and that's the Bot Jobs People Index, because as you scale chatbot programs, Gen AI, you also need the right team to do that. And yeah, Martin, do you want to share a little bit more about the Bot Jobs People Index?
Yeah, sure. So as a brief introduction to the Bot Jobs People Index, a couple of months ago, it was probably about a few months ago actually now, Eric got in touch with me and said, hey, look, we're creating this piece of content called the Chatbot Intelligence Maturity Curve. And we thought it might be interesting to see whether or not there was the ability to take what we've done and create something that shows not only the technical aspects of running and evolving and maturing a chatbot strategy, but looking at it from a people perspective. What people do you need? The right people at the right time. And so it was an interesting challenge. Went away, took a look at it, and found some really, really interesting data and some really interesting trends. So took that and created what we're now calling the Bot Jobs People Index. What we're looking at then is making sure that you are hiring for the right people at the right time within your chatbot strategy. Really, really excited to show this off a bit.
Yeah, thank you for that, Martin. We're excited to dive into it. So I do want to share, we designed these frameworks and we had a huge help from Henry, the team at Dashbot, Martin, kind of, building all this together. And it's really meant for anyone who, if you're early on in maturity, you're starting out, maybe you're researching bots or you're designing them, all the way up to we've worked with companies that are scaling and optimizing their bots. So the frameworks are meant to provide actionable steps, help you through that curve. We'll be sending out the resources after the call, so everyone will get a copy of that as well as the recording. And we save some time at the end for Q&A. So if there's like really specific questions that you guys have, yeah, wait till the end. We'll get to those. You could also drop them in the chat early if you want. We'll come back to them. But to kind of kick things off, I kind of want to poll the audience here a little bit. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and it's just meant to get a little bit of feeling of the room. So let me launch this, and it's going to ask a question. If everyone can see this, please answer. It'll pop up on your screen. It says, where do you think you are on the maturity curve? And these are very loose buckets. You know, there's overlap in all of them, but maybe you're early on in your career designing, researching bots. Maybe you've launched a few bots. You're kind of feel like you're midway, or you've been working in this industry for a long time, done different modalities, different bots. You feel like you're more on that late stage. But yeah, take a chance to check that out. We got Chelsea, 10 years. I would say that's a little bit on the late side. That's awesome. Does anyone
Yeah,
else
it's crazy,
10 years?
crazy to think that we're still in such a young kind of industry, even though, you know, the first chatbot was like 1966. We still feel as though we're very much in a young industry where we're still seeing, you know, people who are very much in their early careers, you know, who've been spending, you know, 2-3 years in their career here, and it's just so exciting to be part of something that's so still young and growing.
Yeah, I agree. It always feels new. I will say that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, the poll is finished here. So it looks like actually a really even split. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'll try to share it. But yeah, here we go. Share results. Hopefully you guys can see this
Wow,
on screen.
right down the middle.
Right down the middle. Yeah, yeah. Really cool. So thanks everyone for answering that. Now, as we kind of dive into the guts of this, I think it would help if we started. Let's just start with a real world example, because we could talk about frameworks and theory all day, but let's talk about some real actual companies and what we've seen in the market. So I think to set a foundation, I'm going to ask Henry and Martin if you guys could share a little bit about how have you seen successful companies go through this maturity, whether it be the technology or the people side, and how have they built out their teams and their tech over time. So Henry, I know maybe you could kick it off with what you've seen on the tech side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'll share a little story, right? So one of our first customers I've ever worked with was Intuit, and specifically their QuickBooks division. And so they launched their bot, and you can imagine as essentially an assistant to help you through the tax filing process. I'm sure as each and every year when you're going through that tax filing, you have tons of new questions that come up. Like, what does this mean? What does this tax code mean? How can I deduct more and save more money? Tons of these questions pop up. And that's typically when their contact centers get over flooded with volumes, and they needed to find a way digitally to be able to enhance that experience and provide essentially a more streamlined way for customers to self-serve and find their own answers. And so naturally it became determined that the chatbot deployed at that tax filing portion of their experience was going to be that lowest hanging fruit and create the most impact for their business. But what's most important and what led to their initial success was essentially starting with their data, right? Understanding what were the most common types of questions, collecting the right documents, the right knowledge bases about all those different tax codes, those tax laws that were getting asked most frequently in their contact centers during those peak times. And so rather than focusing on multiple different channels, trying to boil the ocean, they really dialed into that single experience, right? Your side-by-side companion as you're going through your tax filing, and then quickly being able to open up a chat interface and ask questions, get those resolutions, and then move on with their process to make, again, that process really streamlined. And so that's where they started. Again, starting with a simple use case, starting with data and understanding what they need to automate first that would have the highest impact before then scaling out to other different channels, right? From there, they went into IVR, they went into their mobile app, and then the way their business is also structured, all their teams are divided regionally. And so they have their LATAM, they have their APAC region, and each of these bots had to be localized for these different languages. and support the different ways those cultures engage with those bots. And they had to stand up those specific teams to support that. But really what led to their initial success was really honing in on that first use case, dialing that down, making sure that it was hitting all the goals, it was performing effectively before scaling out to other channels and eventually other languages to support. And keep in mind, this was back in the day where there was only intent-driven bots. There's no generative AI, large language models that can handle all these different languages nowadays. And so each of these intent models and that support different languages had to be trained up individually. So they had a very methodical approach. But as you know, it's like starting small, expanding, like defining success, narrowing your use case before expanding that out. But in lieu of that, also hiring for these localized teams, supporting these languages. And Martin, maybe you could jump in here, right? Is how do we even scale from the people perspective? I touched a little bit on the tech side, but would love to get your perspective in terms of building out teams to support that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a fantastic example because it ultimately talks to exactly. Sorry, I don't know why that's going off. Ultimately, it talks to exactly what we've been talking about in the people index, which is taking the initial the initial strategy of launching one bot. And what I tend to see, what we tend to see at bot jobs when people are starting their strategy is bringing in kind of a jack of all trades, one person who can do a lot of different things. You talk very much about starting with the data, and that tends to be one of the key skills we look at right at the beginning, is somebody who understands how to analyze data, how to build something that's basic, like an MVP type chatbot that works and works well. Somebody who's a designer, somebody who can do absolutely everything all at once. And the story of Intuit is really interesting because it really does map what we tend to see around around how organizations mature their people strategy around it as well, starting from that kind of one person, that jack of all trades, through to then creating a team that has very specialized roles. So you then split up and say, okay, well, we need a conversation designer, we need a data analyst, we need a project manager, we need somebody who's somebody who can build NLU, etc., etc. And then we start looking at how that then splits out very much. Global organizations tend to look at this kind of center of excellence type model. And so where you're now starting to see, that core kind of process and policy being managed by the center of excellence, but then looking at different teams that are either localized or specialist in different channels, different modalities. And so that really does, Intuit's example is the perfect example to show just how an organization over time not only matures their technology strategy, but looks at the people that they need to ensure that is scaling appropriately.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you mentioned the jack of all trades, I like to think of like any company that's trying to build emerging technology, right? Cutting edge technology, new products. I feel like the jack of all trades, the first product manager, call it, that gets hired to initiate to initiate these projects. I think of them almost as like mini CEOs, right? Yeah. They're not exactly running their own company, but they are building something from the ground up, from scratch, right? Yeah. And in this case, with Intuit's example, they started from scratch, right? They picked a NLP NLU model, and they hired all their engineers, all their conversation designers, and they definitely had someone that was leading the charge, organizing everything, making sure all the data connections were right, leading all the conversation designers. And so, yeah, it's a tough job, but in many ways, you're like a product manager / CEO trying to build some brand new product from the ground up. You have to have a vision of what it's going to look like, be able to set goals that maybe didn't exist because the products never existed before. So you got to define what those KPIs and those goals are. And in many cases, and especially nowadays, right, it's led to opportunities for new startups that can help aid these mini CEOs, like, to buy technology versus hire people. Now you have a little bit of a pool to choose from. Where does it make most sense? And that's kind of where the story of Dashbot began, right? We found this little slice of the pie, this opportunity where it's like, you can either hire a bunch of data analysts and engineers to build you dashboards and try to get you to consume and analyze that unstructured data, and then hire a team of analysts to actually comb through that to find insights and help you improve your bot. Versus like the opportunity we saw at Dashbot was we can build a platform that can do all of that, cut out, essentially remove the need and the requirement or that bottleneck for people to have to analyze the data, leverage technology to do that. And we ended up being that like single pane of glass for reporting across all of those deployments, right? For all of Intuit's different experiences, use cases, and deployments in different countries.
Yeah, that's really cool, because it's the same with any innovation. I mean, I've been doing this kind of work for far too long now. I'm not going to admit how long, but let's say decades. And actually, whenever you see kind of new innovation in a corporate or an enterprise business, it tends to be looked at like a startup within that organization. And so you kind of hit the nail on the head there around needing to be like a startup CEO. And so what we tend to see is these kind of little, what ends up being a bit of an innovation hub, where you've got that kind of startup CEO, that startup mentality where, ship quickly, iterate, learn, etc., etc. But absolutely, you're right. The great thing about startup ecosystems is that they create problems that need to be solved, and sometimes they need to be solved by external vendors. And that's exactly what you do at Dashbot. It's exactly what I do at Bot Jobs. The challenge is, you've got a central recruitment team who are used to recruiting all of those corporate roles that the organization does, but then you've all of a sudden got this new kind of shiny new startup within your organization that's dealing in chatbots and conversational AI, and you haven't got the foggiest on how to hire those kind of people, or where to even start. And that's exactly the same thought process is, let's take that effort away from you, let's take that stress away from you, and help you hire the right people. Yeah, exactly that. I love that thought process of actually looking at it like almost like a startup within the organization.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you guys are sharing. I think you're both hitting on some similar points around what businesses go through. It sounds like as they develop a chatbot program, they face these organizational challenges. And, it sounds like Henry on the tech side, they start to go down this build versus buy thought, and, what should they do there? And Martin, you're talking about sort of developing the teams and developing these startup teams kind of within the broader organization. But maybe we could touch a little bit on Henry, what you've seen with sort of the business cases. Part of getting these programs off the ground and getting backing for them is you do have to create the viable business case within the organization. And I know you have expertise helping various companies, with all those challenges and really getting them off the ground inside the enterprise. So, as things have shifted with tech over the years, like, do you have any insights for us on what you've seen with business cases?
Yeah. I might start with a little bit of context, right? I would say, like, in my 7 years of selling technology in this space, I would say it's not always that a business case has been like a rigid requirement, right? I would say it kind of depends a little bit on the economy, the state of the economy, how people, and then like even like current interest rates, right? And how companies decide to spend, invest their cash versus hold their cash. So there have been periods of time in the past where companies will just invest in technology for the purposes of adopting new technologies, being that innovation hub and having that innovation budget, right? To try and test and R&D new things. But I would say in the more recent years, with the economy being a little bit tighter, businesses and business teams have been more rigid and more mandatory around building these business cases. And so it's essentially a business case is making a case for the technology investment, being able to map the value of that technology investment to their existing KPIs and their metrics. And really what the executives want to see is they want a very clear picture on, if you're going to spend X amount of money on this software, what's the ROI? What is your path to deploying and making sure that we hit those numbers? And then essentially, how do we guarantee that it's a good investment? And so that's that's the nature of the business case. But what becomes challenging now with creating business cases in this particular industry is, again, we are selling in a lot of ways like newer emerging tech, cutting edge new technology. And you may have seen different applications of generative AI, right? Leveraging large language models, and it all seems really awesome. And if you're an individual contributor, you're utilizing those different tools today, you feel a lot of that impact in your role, right? Like, for example, asking questions to ChatGPT, being able to get answers, get knowledge, reformat your writing, your copywriting in seconds, and getting that feedback. You really do feel that impact as like a day-to-day user. But now, how does that actually translate over into business impact, right? Let's say as a marketer and you're using GPT to assist you with your copywriting, how does that translate into more revenue, more dollars? How do you prove the ROI behind it, right? So there's some of these use cases that are a little bit more cut and straightforward, right? I would give like an example of, like, let's say an agent co-pilot, right? If you're training that co-pilot on your knowledge base, it's assisting that agent to reduce their average handle time. It increases their first contact resolution. These are all existing KPIs in the contact center that are being used today to map and measure success. And your tool now is directly impacting those, right? You can run a pilot, compare period A to period B. How much did you reduce average handle time, improve FCR, improve resolution? Again, tied to specific metrics. And that's where a lot of these initial tools have found success, right? You can get investment, you can get big dollars especially in the enterprise space, if you can map it to success. But now, what about these newer and more cutting edge tools, right? Using LLMs for smart search, or like creating like multimodal chatbot experiences. You start to get into this world of what are all these different possibilities. All these ideas are awesome. And from a user experience perspective, it might be great for the end user, but for the business to have to provide that investment, to hire the people to build it and the technology to power it, how much money does it put in and how much do they expect back? That's kind of a question mark that still a lot of businesses have a struggle, and even startups that are selling this technology struggle to be able to answer. And so I'll leave it there. Martin, I'll give you a chance to chime in here, but that's at least what I've seen here is, like, in order to get big dollars and investments, we have to be able to prove out some type of business impact and make that really, really dialed in.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of nodding furiously through all of that. You're singing the same tune that I do. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that enterprises have in adopting any new technology, let alone kind of generative AI and conversational AI, is working out what the ROI is, and not just kind of going after the shiny object. And we talk about responsible AI and ethical AI and what have you, and I always talk about relevant AI, and ultimately, is it relevant? Is it solving a challenge? Is it going to either make things cheaper, or is it going to increase the revenue? And so yeah, absolutely, you're talking exactly my language, and something that I've seen over my course of my career is people really struggling to define what that ROI is when they're building a business case. The so what, great that you want this new technology, but so what? And I'm so glad that you mentioned the people that are required as well, because one of the things that I certainly see time and time again is when the business cases are put in, it's all about the technology, all about we've spoken to this vendor, this is what the investment's going to be in this technology, and we've looked at 3 different options, blah 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 blah, but nobody ever thinks about, have we got the right people, and do we need to invest in the right people, and put together that investment business case for the people to ultimately deliver the ROI that we're expecting from that new innovation. And it's really interesting because I've worked with a few people on this, few organizations on this, in terms of kind of planning out their people strategy. And there's so many options. It's like a mix and match. You don't have to, if you're doing something that needs significant ramp up, but then actually drops back down into that kind of plateau of maintenance and management, then you can bring on freelancers and contractors and people to kind of help with that ramp up piece, but then drop off again. And the wonderful thought process around investing in a contingent workforce, for interims and contractors, is you only need to pay for them when you need them. And so there's lots and lots of ways that you can work out a pretty decent business case that really does show ROI. Because ultimately, like I said, you're not going to get the ROI without having people there to deliver the promises of that technology.
Yeah, I love that. I love that nuance you added, right? And I never thought about it before, but it's like bots all have different phases, right? Maybe a lot of the heavy lifting comes initially, where you need that jack of all trades that leads the ship and getting all the very talented people in to build that very first iteration. But later on, it's like as you kind of reach your maturity, it's more of like maintain, not set it and forget it per se, but like a little maintenance, like updates along the way. And maybe you don't need someone who's like full-time managing the bots unless you're trying to expand it to other use cases. You can have like a freelancer that come in to do that monitoring, and that can be factored into the business case. So I love that. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, if we've all kind of launched God knows how many bots over the last several years, and we know the sheer effort that goes into getting that ready to launch. And we also know that it's never kind of fully ready to go until it goes into the wild anyway. But ultimately, the sheer amount of effort that it takes to actually get that bot ready to go compared to the effort to maintain it and manage it is totally different. So absolutely, you can think about project based and contingent workforce based solutions to dare I say limit your resource investment, your human capital investment when launching a bot project.
Got it. I have actually an interesting question here, and I'll start by raising this point here, which is like what I've seen is like the business maturity curve always moves slower than the technology. And what I mean by that is like, we saw the release of GPT models like LLMs 2 years ago, right? And us as like regular consumers, we already may be using it in our day to day. Same thing with startups. But if you look, the bigger bigger the business, and as you look into bigger enterprises, chances are they're probably not implementing any large language models or generative AI until even a few years from today. And so it leads to the question around like this technology exists, like it must be frustrating for the people who work there. It's like, why can't I get my hands on this? I see other companies using it. I see other peers doing so, but they're getting gate kept because let's say like there's certain evolutions in their architecture that haven't been updated yet. Or maybe it's all like a lot of this I've learned in the past few years is that the culture of the people there are resistant to change, right? It's like we're happy doing things the way we've been doing it. Why do we want to introduce newer things that maybe we don't fully understand yet? And anything that people don't fully understand, you kind of default to maybe it's not safe, it's risky, right? And so like I wanted to bring up the point that like again, technology always moves quicker than business adoption, but how do we begin to help bridge that gap? And when you talk about the people, and then when I also paint the problem of the culture, it almost feels like there's something there where hiring the right people that are more data driven, that have this culture of understanding new technology and can begin to socialize that and educate other stakeholders around what are the risks, what are the guardrails that we can put up to mitigate those risks and help create this culture of adopting and utilizing data more effectively and more confidently and adopting these two new technologies. I think that's what's really going to set some of these bigger enterprises apart that again can adopt these and begin utilizing these new technologies. And it does start with the people, right? Like without the people, you're never going to get the technology in place. And so I'd be curious also to get maybe your thoughts on that. It's like hiring the right people, not just for their skill sets, but for their ability to socialize certain ideas and bring them to the table and get adoption to move just a bit faster for these larger organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because we're in a very, very interesting time in kind of the history of technology and adoption, and everybody's like super excited about generative AI and large language models and GPTs and all those kind of things. And what I've seen is we've got this massive disparity. It's kind of like this chasm that needs to be crossed in larger enterprises where you've got this top-down approach where the senior leadership, the C-suite are saying we need this, it's the future, and everybody needs to be AI and blah 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 blah. And then you have, you know, the bottom up approach, which is where people are bringing their own AI to work, and we've seen that in recent reports from Microsoft and LinkedIn, where 75% of knowledge workers are using AI on a daily basis, but actually, you know, the vast majority of that is people using their own personal AI tools rather than something that's done by the business, because the business is slow to move. So we've got this real kind of chasm right in the middle, where we've got the bottom up, where people are adopting AI but their own kind of tooling. We've got the top down, which is where leadership is saying we need AI in the organization. There's something going wrong in the middle, and it's kind of missing each other. And you're quite right. You know, those people in the middle are the ones that need to bring that all together. And so we talk about kind of the right skills at the right time, but actually there's a massive skill in evangelizing and bringing the stakeholders along with you. And so we talk about that in the people index, where actually that happens a little bit later on, where you have a specific singled out leader who is the link between, you know, the new innovation, you know, the chatbot team and the organizational leadership, and gets involved in, and so that's the really interesting part of this, is that as somebody who's either that kind of jack of all trades right at the beginning or the leader right at the end, and we talked about this a little bit in the business case piece, is that you need to make sure that everything you're doing is aligned with the organizational strategy. And so you're never going to get anywhere if you're just doing things for the sake of doing things. If you're aligning your operations and your vision and your strategy with what the organization is trying to achieve, then you're going to get there, and you're going to bring people along with you. But it does take communication, networking, stakeholder management, storytelling, the whole lot of it, because there are absolutely people that are always push back against change. You know, the most dangerous words to any innovation are because that's the way we've always done it, and people who are innovative, you know, really hate that, because that's not an answer. It doesn't mean that it's the best way of doing it. It just means that's the way you've always done it. And you're going to get those people, and you're going to have to be a certain person who can push back against that, but in a very diplomatic, very strategic way. So it's definitely a key skill of anybody that's coming in to lead the strategy, whether it's right at the beginning as the jack of all trades, or right at the end as the organizational leader for your chatbot and conversational AI strategy. Absolutely. It's a really interesting thing that we're seeing right now, is this kind of massive disparity that's going on between the top and the bottom of the organization.
Yeah, I did not know about people bringing their own AI on their personal like emails to their day-to-day work, right? And
Yeah.
you can imagine if it's a knowledge-based role and you're, let's say, working for a company like Microsoft, like if Microsoft knows that, let's say 50% of their employees in that department are already using their own versions of OpenAI to assist their work, then it's like, you know, like are the sources that they're using the OpenAI or ChatGPT for, like it's pulling off of everything available on the internet effectively, right? It's like how many, I've heard of a lot of bad links, old links, bad data that lives on the internet, which ultimately can contribute to these hallucinations, right? Like malperformance, incorrect answers. And it's like, if you know your employees are already utilizing this, why not put some guardrails, give them the tools that they need, and then make sure that that tool is confined to their actual up-to-date database. And I feel like that's going to be a major opportunity for a lot of companies building out these solutions. Yeah.
Absolutely. And not only that, but think about some of the more kind of institutional risks around that, you know, the legal risks, the data protection risks, the commercially confidential risks that go along with sharing your data into what is essentially you know, an open tool that you've got no control over. So there's definitely some major issues and concerns around that, but it just shows, like I said, the disparity between the top and the bottom of larger organizations. I think the difference is that smaller organizations, you know, can make decisions and make them pretty quickly, and implement those decisions because there's less kind of hierarchy involved. It's the difference between, you know, a large, you know, oil tanker in the ocean and a speedboat in the ocean. You know, if you want one to change direction, it's going to happen a lot quicker in the speedboat than it is in the tanker. So it's exactly the same concept. Things take a lot longer in big enterprises because there are a lot more people that need to be involved in that decision. Like you said, there's issues with older technology and all those kind of things that people need to take into account.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that analogy, by the way.
Yep. Yeah, I'm loving these insights. And I think, this is leading us to sort of round this out a little bit. We had a few specific questions that I wanted to ask. And what you guys have already shared, with your insights on how to look at organizations and, what you're seeing on the ground, I think actually leads into this really well. So, Martin, I might kick it off with you. These are questions we get asked, daily, if not weekly, and it's really around what's changing in the world, a little bit on the career path side and the technology side. So to start with you, Martin, for someone who's on the ground, maybe looking to break into this chatbot CAI industry, or they're somewhat developed, but they're, maybe looking at a new company, what are some tips? I know you mentioned some of the organizational challenges already, but what do you see as, some ways to break into the industry?
I get asked this all the time, and actually, it really does depend where an organization is at on their maturity curve or their people index curve. Because if somebody's trying to break into the industry, you're not going to break into an organization who is right at the beginning, because they need somebody who's experienced, who knows a lot of different things about the one thing. And so, if you're looking to break into it, that's not the right time. The opportunities come once the team starts breaking up into specialist roles. And that's where you can bring transferable soft skills into the mix, because it might not be the fact that they want to bring on somebody who has multiple years of experience doing something. They might want to bring somebody on who's got experience in the industry that they're working in. We see that a lot, where actually certainly in e-commerce, financial, healthcare, where actually the experience in the industry is more important than the experience in doing the actual role. If the transferable skills are there and somebody can learn on the job, then that's where the opportunities are. So yeah, it's a lot of different things going on right now. I'd like to say that conversation design is still alive and well. There's been a big trend on LinkedIn recently about talking whether conversation design is dead or not. It's alive and well. We saw a dip in requirements for conversation designers just after the launch of ChatGPT, almost 2 years ago, because organizations thought they could do it themselves. By about March 2023, that had reversed pretty much, and people realized that actually, they still need somebody to tame the ChatGPT beast. So I would say not much has changed in the world of work in terms of the roles that are out there. But I do think that if you're looking to break into the industry, working with an organization who is already well on their way to maturity is a better way of doing it, rather than an organization that hasn't started yet. When we first started talking about this project, I made the point of, when it was kind of just us on a call, made the point of talking about how organizations that have got it wrong are the organizations that have given a chatbot project to somebody in IT, much the same way they would have done with a website 20 years ago. So I think organizations that are starting on that route realize their mistakes and bring somebody expert in. That's not where you want to join if you're looking to join in the industry. Have a speak to the organization, find out where they are on that maturity curve, and know the right point to try and inject yourself into that.
Awesome.
That's
I actually have a follow-up question for you, Martin, just for my own curiosity as well, right?
Cool. You're not looking for a new job, are you, Henry? No, I'm only joking.
But for my own curiosity, I have a younger brother, like 7 years ago, 7 years younger than me, and he and his friends, sometimes they ask for what are some advice for approaching interviews for getting their first entry level job, right? And it reminds me of when you're talking about breaking into this new industry, maybe no previous experience, how do you best do it? And when I give him advice for something like applying for a sales role as an entry level SDR, I recommend him to go and familiarize himself with the tech stack that an SDR would typically use, right? Understand what a CRM is, your prospecting tools for email, your automation, your LinkedIn sales nav, being able to talk, right? Helps whoever you're interviewing for. It's hey, this person knows the tech stack. I don't need it's not as expensive or as much effort to hire and ramp them, right? So this person I'm gonna pick them out of the bunch, right? I'm gonna set them apart. is there that same parallel in this conversation design role, maybe a specialist role that where you're breaking in? I'm curious if there is a parallel here with familiarizing yourself with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, there are loads and loads of free resources on conversation design out there. You know, you don't have to do a highly expensive course to understand the concepts of conversation design. The other great thing is that the vast majority of the technology platforms that people build with, whether it's Google, IBM, IBM Watson, or Amazon, or whoever, you know, Cognigy, you could Core, you can name them all. VoiceFlow, can't forget about them as well. And ultimately, all of those platforms are open, so you're able to go and actually sign up for them, do the developer training, all those kind of things. So I would absolutely suggest the same. You know, get your head around the core concepts of conversation design, get your head around the core concepts of things like NLU, NLP, and start building. You know, we've now got great platforms that utilize both NLP and Gen AI, you know, Google Vertexes of the world and what have you. And so absolutely familiarize yourself with the technology. The other great thing is that there are early career opportunities, intern opportunities in this world as well. We see them being advertised. If you have a look on bot jobs, there's you know, a handful up there already at the minute. But not only that, we also see charities looking for people to come and help them on a voluntary basis as well. So not only do you want to learn the concepts of conversation design, conversational AI, start dabbling in the technology, but go out there and get real world experience, because one of the biggest pushbacks that I see from employers is, especially on the design side of things, people want to see design portfolios, conversation design portfolios. And if that's limited to the projects that you've built during a certification, then that doesn't really cut the mustard with employers that well. If you're showing real world examples which are based on, you know, on the STAR concept when you're showing off your portfolio, so what was the situation, what did you do, what was the task, what was the action, and what were the results? You want to see real world results. You know, what did you do, why did you do it, and what were the results? And if you're putting that in a portfolio in a real world example, then there's no better way of demonstrating your skills and their applicability to the business than doing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love how you simplified into acronym, but then I also I did not even realize like building a portfolio as a conversation designer is almost as like I used to think of it as like that's for UI UX. You have to have a portfolio that represents like projects that you've done, and it's essentially your resume, right, for that role. And so yeah, it definitely sounds like it's the same, and likewise for this conversation designer role.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Love that. Great insights, Martin. And now maybe on the tech side for you, Henry, I know that you've touched on a lot of the organizational challenges, the build versus buy, the business, you know, being a little bit slow in maturity, whereas people inside the organization are a little bit faster to adopt tech. I think something really specific people might want to know is when companies are scaling bots, they're kind of either launching or they have one launch and they're trying to optimize it. What are some of the milestones that they should try to hit as they go through this curve?
Yeah, so we sit at kind of an interesting time now where there's both the existence of like intent-based models and you have large language models or generative AI powered bots. And I would say it's not black or white, right? You don't have to choose one or the other. And in many cases, a lot of the most successful deployments I've seen are a hybrid or a merger of both the two. And you know, the reason why it's so successful is because as high performing as these large language model experiences are, right? They're super dynamic. You can ask it multiple questions in a single interaction and it can resolve it. That API call for a large language model, when you tap into that large language model, unfortunately, is still going to be an order of magnitude more expensive than using an intent-based API call, right? And so So at the end of the day, you have to balance out when are you tapping into that large language model to be able to pull and find the response versus when do you still want to use deterministic decision tree or an intent-based model to resolve that problem. Because especially as you scale, right? You think of enterprise volumes, you think of multi-channel, you think of essentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of interactions per month. Spending 10 times the cost on an API call versus 1/10 of that is going to make a big difference in your final cost calculations and the final measurement of impact for your bot. And so the best piece of advice I can give is understanding exactly which use cases that don't compromise that customer experience can be resolved and automated using a deterministic flow, aka an intent flow. These things, like simple examples, would be like simple transactional tasks, right? You need to reset your password. Well, okay, give me your email, give me your one part of registration, a way to identify that you're who you are, and I'll give you a new password link. Or it's a form fill, right? Let's say you're doing a claim submission for an insurance company. The standard things before an agent can connect with you, they need your address, your phone number, first name, last name, right? These things don't need large language models to power it. Utilize cheaper alternatives to power those portions of that conversation, save the power of the large language models to the more complex questions that do need to tap into that more complex, more powerful model. So I'll touch on that first. And another thing when it comes to milestones specifically, I'll end with this, which is making sure that as your bot program matures, that your ability to capture data, report, and provide the analytics on those experiences are also growing in maturity. And so there's resources out there where you can Google like analytics maturity curve. Really, like the most important 3 steps here is for analytics, it typically always starts off as proactive. I mean, not proactive, reactive. So you're collecting data after the fact, right? You're deploying your bot, you're reviewing the data after the fact, see what's happening, what's going wrong, and you make adjustments from there. But the goal is to be able to move from reactive, where you're taking action on your data, like weeks, days, if not weeks after the fact, to being more proactive, right? And proactive essentially means you want to start capturing data and producing insights more in real time. You don't want to have a data extraction process, a cleaning process that delays your insights for days and weeks. That's what lands you in the reactive bucket. So you want to move your data and insights to more real time, become more proactive, and eventually being able to leverage these newer AI models, these AI analytics platforms to become predictive. So catching issues as they're happening in real time before they become widespread. And so you can imagine as a company's chatbot maturity grows and matures, you're going out to more use cases, you're growing and scaling to more customers adopting these experiences. And it becomes so much more important to be able to capture issues in real time and then be able to act on it, resolve them, fix those systemic problems before they do become widespread. Because widespread for something like, let's say, a company like Intuit can prove to be disastrous, just given the level of volume, or let's say if it's in peak season when everybody is slamming their contact centers and their channels during those peak times. And so, yeah, so again, 2 things: knowing when and where to use LLMs versus deterministic. And then the second is making sure that you're scaling and maturing your analytics program alongside your chatbot maturity.
Really good stuff. Yeah, I think that's something that, our audience, people who are becoming leaders in this space, being able to balance those 2 things and really coming to the table with the stakeholders and being able to clearly explain, here's why we need LLMs, or here's why we need to stick with the traditional NLP transactional use cases. I think that's going to really help people, build these use cases, build these business cases, and push these projects. So appreciate you sharing that.
I don't know if I can just follow up on a question to Henry on that one. I know he likes to throw questions at me, so I'm going to throw a question at him. So,
yeah, absolutely.
No, actually, it was just I don't know if you've seen this, but I've certainly seen people using LLMs to help with intent classification. That's the kind of biggest use case I've seen, which is stopping that whole kind of cycle of death of I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Whereas if you're getting that intent that you just can't classify through traditional kind of NLU techniques, then it's passing it off to a LLM and saying, yeah, well, can you classify this for me? And actually stopping that kind of circle of I'm sorry, I didn't understand that, which is just significantly improving the user experience as well. I don't know if you've kind of seen the same thing, but that's certainly seen where I've seen a big use case for LLMs in the conversational AI kind of stack.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I've definitely seen applications of that, which is like, if we see more than one intent failed, like, that's the fallback, right? We trigger generative fallback. I love that, Chelsea.
Yeah,
That's,
perfect.
I'm going to steal that from you.
Yeah, that's really cool. I am as well. Not just a recruiter. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like if not a generative fallback, then I would say at the minimum to be able to preserve the customer experience, like no bot should ever in today's world, right, should ever put someone in that endless cycle of can you rephrase, repeat? I don't understand your question. If it happens more than twice, you should probably just be offering an escalation path to an agent, right? There's no reason why that customer should be stuck in that loop. Because if they are and they're repeating that more than twice, chances are they're never going to give that chatbot a chance or try it ever again, right? It'll crush your brand loyalty. It'll crush that customer experience. And so one thing I will note from that, right, and it's linked to this generative fallback and the escalation path is you have to balance out operational KPIs and metrics versus the experience-based KPIs and metrics. And so any company that focuses too much on one over the other, you're kind of putting something at risk, right? Focus too much on experience and creating delightful experience, you may be losing on some of the costs and the efficiency that you could have, right? You could be losing out on some of the self-service, higher containment or deflection rates. But on the flip side, if you focus too much on the operational side, you might be compromising on the customer experience. And so understanding where do you need to separate those two, and more importantly, educating your stakeholders and your executives on like, why do we need to separate them? Why do we need to look at them individually and make sure there's always a balanced approach to improving both, or at least maintaining one while improving the other? I think that's really key to success. And methods and techniques like generative fallback or quick isolation paths is one of those ways to balance out between those two.
Nice. Like that kind of balance between operational and experience-based metrics. Really like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'll tie this into that example we gave of the endless loop, right? You put someone in an endless loop, they'll technically never escalate. They're stuck in that endless loop. So if you're looking at it from an operational lens, you might say, great, we don't have a lot of escalations. Our chatbot's doing a great job. But an endless loop is going to cause people to be very frustrated, right? Very angry with the bot. You'll see your experience-based KPIs, such as sentiment or your effort score. Those are going to be negatively impacted. So again, having visibility to both will tell you that full story, right? And so again, capturing both, educating your stakeholders on why both are important, and then applying these techniques to make sure both are being maintained or improved along the way.
Nice.
Yeah, I think we've all seen examples of that with, certain apps or sites that optimize for pushing notifications to you just to get more engagement, and it ends up creating a terrible experience. So it's a great to think about that balance. Well, do you guys, Martin, Henry, I want to sort of bring this all together here at the end. Was there anything from your guys' side that you wanted to dive into in addition to these topics, or any final words?
There's nothing additional. I think for me, it's just about making sure that people feel that they can make the right talent decisions at the right time. I think that's the key bit to make sure that you can see success in your conversational AI and your chatbot strategy. You have to have the right people at the right time. So when you are planning ahead and when you are thinking about kind of future strategy, make sure that you bear in mind that there are lots of human capital options available.
Yeah, I might just add that I know I'm going to bring that back to like Martin's example earlier, where like you have a lot of businesses today have pressure from the top down, which is the executive saying, we need AI. Let's implement it all across the board. And then there's this chasm in between, right? Where it's like the customers also want to use self-service. They want to use these channels. They don't want to call into a traditional contact center anymore. But in the middle are these jack of all trades, right? These startup CEOs of this new line of business, this new cutting edge tech, and they have the hardest job, which is like they have to build all these new solutions and they have to make sure these solutions are scalable and they're successfully scaling. And a lot of the times when it comes to the data and the analytics side to measure progress and success, there's a lot of these jack of all trades and these leaders they do feel like they're flying blind, right? Especially as their bots become more complex. They start getting deployed to multiple channels, multiple different use cases. It's like, how do we standardize the way that we measure success? How do we spend less time like manually rifling through data and handling this complex data and focusing on just what's most important? What are the issues? How do we grow our use case and then grow our actual resolution rate? And it's not an easy question to answer. And I do empathize with a lot of those leaders in those roles that are struggling to be able to communicate that with leaders. And so I'll just add, like, that's part of the genesis of Dashbot, is to give you clarity on all of this new data, specifically unstructured data that's being generated out of these new LLM-based bots, even intent-based bots. How do we make sense of not only what are those metrics and KPIs that define success in the bot, but if something does go wrong or something does go extremely right, we can actually help you uncover the context behind why and what is that root cause. And that's going to be really key to be able to telling your story and then understanding what should be on your roadmap to carry out your vision and carry out long-term success.
Very important. Yeah, love it. Thank you, Henry. I think that's a nice way to put a cap on it. And I know I mentioned, we've just got a minute here left, but if anyone has a specific question they want to ask, feel free to drop it in the chat. You can also reach out to us. We're all on LinkedIn all the time. You can find us on there. And we'll be sending out copies of the Chatbot Intelligence Maturity Curve, the Bot Jobs People Index, and a recording if you want to go back over any of the content. So I'll send that out after. But again, thank you everyone for joining in. We hope that there were some insights you could take away from this, and look forward to seeing you all at the next one.
Yeah, thank you so much for getting me involved in this. Really, really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Martin. Enjoyed throwing questions at you, but wonderful, even better answers.
No, great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, guys.
All righty.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you all.
Take care.